Hey, so I wanted to do a quick walkthrough of the Cypress test or Cypress testing for the SLCSP calculator. And just wanted to kind of start looking through some code and then show the Cypress UI and just kind of talk about what we're doing. Um, so the SLCSP calculator at a high level is an anonymous tool. So it requires no login, doesn't persist any information. It allows people to provide some information about their household, where people live, whether they've had marketplace coverage, and then all of that form data gets sent to enroll to a REST API using a REST API to return some information about what their premium credit should be each month. And there are something like 70 something scenarios, different permutations of household combinations, people of different ages, different relationships in the household, people moving in and out of particular areas and changing the premiums. And so because of that, you can imagine how beneficial it would be to have at least a core subset of those test scenarios covered. And so the way that I've approached this is to build build the tool according to just a single happy path. Just build out each page, make sure the form data itself is able to be retrieved. And before going much further into the nuance of the form, talking about form validation, different states, making sure that all of those different combinations work. I've set up a Cypress test for that most simple, for that simplest combination or permutation. And so with that in mind, we're just going to look through some of the Cypress code here. This is all TypeScript. So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So it should, most of this here will look almost exactly like JavaScript, plain old vanilla JavaScript. And I think as we start to refactor and we start to go and do other stuff with this, we may lean a little bit on TypeScript, but for the most part, this just looks like JavaScript. So this is a pretty, the way this is laid out is a pretty common pattern in JavaScript testing, JavaScript unit testing, which is you start kind of with a single describe block at the top. So this is like a high level grouping, the SLCSP calculator. There's kind of a sense of lifecycle hooks that you can tap into or hook into for tests. This is an it block that runs a single test. And so before each is just saying, before each one of these it blocks, run this thing. And so before we actually run any of the tests, we want to do a few things, which are to visit the root path, to just have that initial navigation to the root of the Angular application. And then there are a few pages or a few kind of default things that every single scenario, regardless of household composition or residence or anything like that, they're going to do. So you're going to kind of click on this start link, click start the tax year, and then continue to the household. Just notice as we do these things that all of, or the API that we're using is the get method on the Sci object or the Sci class, Sci short for Cypress. And so pretty much all of these commands are going to start with Sci dot something. We'll look, there's not really too many differences here, but within the get or the get method takes one parameter, which is some sort of selector, attribute selector, CSS class selector, really any CSS selector. And the pattern that I've been using for years is the data attribute selector. This essentially decouples the way we select our elements in the DOM from anything else in that happens to exist in the template. So we don't attach it to styling. We don't attach it to just native elements, because any of those things could really change. We might decide to go from an H1 to an H2, and so we don't want to have our tests fail because we've chosen maybe a different hierarchy to our template. We don't want to break our tests because we've chosen to style the page a little bit differently. And since when we do front-end development, those things can be not terribly dynamic, but a little bit more fluid, or a little bit less static than in other frameworks or in other styles of building. We want to make sure that all of our selectors are decoupled from all of that other stuff, logic and styling and presentation. So these data-sci attribute selectors, they only exist to hook into Cypress tests. That's it. That's the only reason they exist. So we have a few side gets at the beginning. So we're getting this start link. We're getting the start tax here, and then notice we're chaining this dot something where you kind of like do a dot get on the sci object or the sci class, and then a dot click off of that. That's called method chaining. And this is a very, very typical pattern in Cypress. Usually they don't get too much longer than that. You're not doing like 17 chains of method calling, but hopefully all of this stuff reads pretty well. And so you've got, hey, get this thing with this attribute and click on it. Get this thing with this attribute and click on it. Get this thing with this attribute and click on it. Great. So then we come to the very first test. And by the way, it's the only test that I've got. And you might wonder, why don't we have, multiple scenarios or multiple tests that each test little pieces? And the answer to that, I will show you very quickly. So we're going to come back to this in a moment, but I'll just show you when we, so let me just do that. When we run our test, this is what it looks like. So we're going to refresh. That was the whole test. That was one entire flow. So the entire thing, and it took 2 seconds. 2 seconds. The entire flow, start to finish, takes 2 seconds. And so the idea that we would break this up into smaller groupings is just not worth it. So the way that Cypress is meant to be used is as a full end-to-end user flow test. Testing the UI, specifically focused on testing the UI, nothing beneath that in the stack really should be tested in Cypress. Excuse me. And so this one test is kind of described as it should fill out the form for one person with no change in residence. This is my way of describing this most simple scenario. There's one person. They don't have a change in residence. I might even say that they're covered for the entire year, but I don't think that makes a huge difference right now. And so this is just end-to-end, the complete workflow. So let's look through this. First of all, I've done quite a bit with comments. This is not maybe typical for so many comments to exist, but I just want to make sure that this is like very well documented. So here's the household page. This is the page that you land on. Go through that in a minute. Then here's the member detail page, a bunch of stuff here. And then the member coverage page, a few actions that are taken here. And then there's the review page and the results page. So there's, I think, 5 total pages that we click through, and it's just that fast. It's 2 seconds. All of this stuff gets clicked, information entered. There are assertions made that we'll look at, and all of it happens in 2 seconds. And once we're done with this, we can go on to another, create a new file maybe, so that we can use some parallelization. And do another scenario, and do maybe 5, 6, 7 scenarios, have them all run in parallel, and you know, have a good amount of confidence that if we refactor, or as you know, calendar years turn over, that you know, that we just have you know, high confidence that our core scenarios are tested. So all right, let's jump into this. Here's the household page. Similar to what we saw before, we've got this data-sci, navigate to member details, should be disabled. All right. This is a button that shouldn't be clickable until the rest of the information on the page is filled out correctly. It actually doesn't matter if this is a button or a link or whatever it happens to be, because whatever this thing is that we reference via this attribute selector, that thing should be disabled. And I just put a comment that said this is the initial household page state. So this is what we expect. You know, these are some assertions that we're making when we land on the household page. All right, so next up, we're going to actually start entering in data. So the first thing that we're going to do is get the household count, and it should have a value of 1. This is also part of the initial household state. The household confirmation group should be unselected. So there's a couple radio options, yes or no. Make sure that those are not checked. These probably don't have like a huge amount of value here, but I'm throwing them in anyway. The data-sci household members list should not exist. So this is a little bit of UI logic. Basically, until one of these things is checked, there should be the members list should not be there. So this is like a DOM element, and we're saying, hey, it shouldn't be on the page until one of these things is checked. Okay. So then we're going to want to click yes. So we're going to want to click on this element to indicate yes, that we confirm or confirm something. And then we want to assert that the household members list now does exist. So not that it's all filled out and it's got certain data in it, but just, you know, the element shouldn't have been there before and now it does. And then we want to actually fill in the name of the primary person. Now this data-sci member-0, that 0 actually is an interpolated value in the template. What do I mean by that? Well, there will be a list of members, and because we need to attach a data-sci attribute to each member, we essentially have an array, 0-based index, and so we kind of say member dash and then whatever the index is. So member -0, member -1, member -0 is the first member of the list. So we grab that text input. It happens to be a text input, but you know, it doesn't really matter. And we type in John, and then the very next thing is we hit click. Remember that this data-sci navigate to members detail, this thing should be disabled when we start the form until we fill this information out. I could reassert down here that it should not be disabled, but by clicking on it, I basically make the same assertion. Like if it's not disabled, I can click on it. So if it did happen to be disabled, I wouldn't be able to click on it. The test would break down here. So this is actually navigating to the member details. This is like a router navigation, so new page. Now we're over here on the member detail page. We grab the member heading, and this is kind of a new one, contains, tell us about John. I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, that's hard-coded English. Yes, it is. We're running the specs in English, and I want to make sure that that's what prints out here. We could change this to, you know, should exist, but that doesn't really give us a lot of value because that should exist There is no UI logic related to it existing or not, so that would be 0 value. And realistically, I could just totally take this thing out. Would not really matter. But leaving it in and just to show, hey, we can check for text. The next thing that we want to do is assert that, once again, that this continue button at the bottom of the page should be disabled, and it is. There's some date of birth information. So notice that just like up here when we typed in John, we're grabbing the month input, the day input, the year input, typing in their birth date. And here's actually where we get to some kind of interesting stuff. So I mentioned earlier that when we do UI testing with Cypress, we don't want to test anything beyond the UI. That's dangerous territory when we test code that we didn't write, because if it breaks, we might not have any possibility of fixing it ourselves. And so just by that very, very simple logic, it is the best idea to draw a boundary around the code that you write and only test that code and let other people test the code that they write. Okay. So what are we doing here? Well, in the UI, the user has the ability to type in a zip code, and once 5 digits have been typed in, an API call is actually made to this CMS.gov, like a healthcare.gov like API, and it's pretty cool. You just send it as a zip code, and it gives you back some information about that zip code. Very cool, very handy. Except we don't actually want to make that API call, because then every time we'd run this test, this test might be run dozens of times, hundreds of times during local development, and certainly every time in CI, continuous integration. Every time we'd run that test, we'd make an API call, and that's just bad practice. There may be occasions when we think that's necessary, but it's really not. And so what do we need to do? Well, we need to mock this API. We need to stub out the response and let the UI think that it's making the call. But in actuality, we are going to intercept that API call. And there are a bunch of different ways to intercept using Cypress. They have great documentation on this, but the simplest way is just to provide kind of a blob pattern. This is called a blob pattern, blob matching. And we say, hey, don't worry about what comes before, but as long as this API request has counties, /something, /this zip code, which we are about to type in, then Cypress, if you notice that API request, please intercept it. Please don't let it actually go through. And when you do return that response, give it, actually return this zip code.json response. And you can see that right here. It is exactly what I would expect the real API to return, but I'm providing this mock data. So again, my UI, the UI thinks that it's made this API call, and it gets back some data that it was expecting, but haha, it was Cypress, not the actual API responding. So this is a little bit of setup. This is just a little bit of setup. And then where we say as, this is what's called aliasing the API call. So we're saying, hey, look for this pattern. If you find this pattern, respond with this JSON, and we'll identify this as this unique identifier zip code search. And you'll see this come into play in just a moment. So now what we're going to do is we are going to get that zip code input, and it's got that -0 for the same reason that we have the -0 up here, because there could be a list of these on the page, and we need to specifically identify the one that we want. So grab that zip code input and type in this zip code. And after you do that, wait, just wait. Could be indefinitely, but probably not. Wait until you detect this API call go through, or attempt to go through. Now, we've already said when you see that, intercept it, respond with this stuff. But what what this does is really, it does two things for us. One is it does intercept the API call and makes prevents it from going through and responds with this fixture. It's called a fixture. I have no idea why. Responds with this zip code JSON, but it's also an assertion. It's saying, hey, watch for this API call because it should happen. And so all of that happens in this one call, sci.wait, and this is like a little special symbol that says this is an alias that we're looking for, zip code search. It matches that. Awesome. So we've got the zip code and a couple more assertions, like when a little response comes back in, we're going to click on it. Now here's something interesting. At this point in time, I don't really have this built out in a very accessible way. It's supposed to be like a combo box. I've never actually built a combo box. I have to do some research on that to get it up to snuff. But I know that at the end of the day, whatever happens with that view, that template that I'm building, and it's not fully built out, that this is the thing that I want to click on. This is the identifier. And so I hope you can understand this is decoupling the testing selector from anything else. Anything else, however I implement this, however it works out in the end, I know that this is the thing that I want to click. And then once I click that, it's going to insert this value 04003 Cumberland County, Maine into another box. So make another assertion that box should now have the value of this. Great, it does. And then finally, this is where the consumer or the person filling out the form has the ability to select all of the months. And you know, I'm kind of looking at this I'm looking at this selector like that might be a little too rigid, but again, just as we needed the zip code -0 as like the first zip code, we also need this. And I used this is the FIPS code. I probably should just use the county, but then I was thinking maybe the county isn't unique enough. I don't know. I'll probably revisit that. That could be improved. Anyway, so select all months. This is a little button in the UI that selects all the months that are available, and then navigate to the member coverage. Remember, this is the same button that at the top we said, hey, this should be disabled, but now it should be clickable. So it is clickable. And then we go to the member coverage page. This is very, very simple. Check that it says John Marketplace Coverage. Yeah, hard-coded English. And then get the navigate to next step. It should not be disabled, and then click it. Wait a minute. That probably doesn't need to exist, right? For the same argument that I made like 5 minutes ago. If something can be clicked, by definition, it is not disabled, and so I probably don't need that. I think I left this in primarily as a way to explicitly say, hey, regardless of anything else you do on the page, none of these checkboxes need to be clicked. And so right off the bat, this button should not be disabled, lest anyone thinks, oh, you know, maybe I forgot to say that specifically, and you've clicked, but the button should have been disabled. So yeah, in that case, I left this in, not because it's necessarily adding value to the assertions, but it's adding value to another kind of really important reason why we test, which is to document our code. Tests are the best form of documentation for code, because they really, you know, if they're passing, that means they are describing the production code really well. And you know, sometimes we write things that aren't so necessary for the test itself, but for the documentation's sake, there it is. All right, then we get our review page, review your information. And here is where we make the final API call to send the entire form data, the entire form value, tweaked a little bit, to the back end to actually get the estimate. And we're going to do the same exact thing that we did with the zip code, which is first say, hey, Cypress, if you notice an API call that kind of looks like this, doesn't matter what comes before it. And you know, this could be like API v1, You know, it could be like PBT3 enroll, blah, blah, blah. Really, it doesn't matter. You know, it's going to be something / SLCSP calculator / estimate. And when you notice an API call being made to a route that matches that, well, what you can do is you can respond with these simple results. And you can imagine the more scenarios we have here, you know, maybe we want to add, but I'll explain why we actually don't care in just a moment. So for now, just return these simple results as, remember, we're going to alias this so we can call it later or reference it later. We're going to reference that as SLCSP estimate. Dashes, whatever, probably, you know, we could do camel case. It doesn't really matter, just as long as these two things match. And then continue to the results. All right. Now, the reason I did it this way, that I added this intercept statement here. By the way, I could put this, you know, way up at the top if I want. It really doesn't matter as long as it comes somewhere before this reference to it. I hope that makes sense. That's kind of a JavaScript thing. It's called hoisting, and hoisting is when you kind of reference a function before it's actually been declared, and generally you don't want to do that. It causes weird things to happen sometimes. So generally, you know, you want to declare something, to initialize something before you use it, and so that's what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, intercept this. Now, the reason I did it on the previous page is because guess what? As soon as you hit the results page, the API call is made. So I didn't want to say, click to go to the next page, then intercept, then wait. I intercepted sometime up here. And then the very first thing that I do on the results page is I wait for that estimate to return. Remember, it's this JSON response that we've stubbed. And it is waiting for this API call to be made, sees that it's made, gets the response. And then all I'm doing here is just seeing that the page says your results. That's it. There are probably a few more things that I could add to the review page. There are probably a few things that I could add to the results page. But here's the reason I say it probably doesn't matter what the simple results are. Well, if we were to somehow say, hey, for this exact combination of household members and residents and coverage, if we know what that exact response is supposed to be and somehow try to create this one-to-one relationship between the scenario that we're testing and the results, what value does that really add? Well, nothing, because that would be testing the back-end logic. That would be trying to create an integration test between two systems, and that just leads to rigid tests that break all the time. So in reality, all that we care is that when the user hits the result page, that an API call is made, and that, you know, there's maybe some text on the page that says your results. We could perhaps enhance this to say, you know, that each one of these displays correctly, or that there are 12 rows in a table. You know, there's things that we could add here, but none of them really add a ton of value. I would say, you know, that the only potential scenario is that some of these could be null. And so maybe there's a case to be made for, you know, altering one of these results and just saying, hey, if one of these is null, you know, make sure the table, the TD element is empty or something like that. That, you know, maybe that's some value. But again, whenever we write these tests, we always want to find the balance between thanks, GitHub Copilot. We always want to find the balance between everything imaginable that we could test, and the absolute bare minimum that we could test, and just find somewhere in between that gives us the right trade-offs, the right balance, and gives us the confidence we need to refactor, gives us the confidence we need to see that our application and our user flows continue to function as we expect, without not covering many edge cases, and on the one end, and on the other end, not testing everything imaginable. So, if you change some styling or change something very insignificant, the whole test suite breaks. So, there's always a balance to be found. All right, I'm going to do another one of these videos probably later on, but at this point, let's quickly look at the Cypress test. So what's fantastic about this, and I showed this running a few minutes ago, but we can just hit rerun one more time and see it goes through pretty quickly. It looks like there is some minor variation in the time. If I hit rerun, 2 seconds, cool. One of the just magical things about Cypress from the very beginning is that it gives a UI just out of the box, really sophisticated UI, and this has evolved greatly over the last 5-6 years. But really a fantastic UI that provides all sorts of functionality. Not going to go into it right now, but right up at the top here we have the name of the described block, which is SLCSP calculator, the name of the test that we're doing, which routes have been stubbed. If there's a before each, it's going to give you that. And then there's the test body. And the test body, this is fantastic. What it does is it actually allows you, see I'm hovering over each step, and it's kind of like identifying what it has done. And not only that, but what the state of the UI looked like. See this like DOM snapshot down here. If I click on this and I pin it, I can actually like investigate what's happening in the UI at that particular moment in time, and then I can click off and have it go back. So as I go through and as I hover, I can see what's going on. Hey, that's when our zip code search happened, and it waited, and it got the data. Here are all of the assertions that we're making, and just really all the way down the line, it just gives such a depth of information that you're never really left, hopefully never really left, like not being able to figure out why something didn't pass, or the errors are always very clear, and if it can't find something, it can't find it, and you're usually able to track it down given this information. So I'll just show it one more time. It runs very quickly all the way through. You can kind of watch it, fill in information, and then here's the final page that we land on. All right, I'm going to minimize that. So the next video that I want to do, I'll just set myself up for this because this is what I was thinking. The next video that I want to do is actually going to be adding another scenario here of 2 people in the household. So this was for 1 person. I'm going to add 2 people, and I'm going to do this. I actually have to write it, so that's fine. But I want to write it without any abstraction at all. So I am going to be duplicating quite a few things, and that's fine. And then we'll show how to abstract those things out of this file so that we can reuse code, and what that looks like, and where that code should live, and how to import it, and everything like that. Because you can probably imagine, we're going to have to get the household count again. We're going to have to get the household confirmation again. And wouldn't it be nice, even though these things are probably pretty set, that if we did want to reference it a 3rd time, and then somehow wanted to change those all, it would be very easy to change them from one location, and they're all referenced the same way here. So that's what we're going to do in the next video, and I will see you then.